Because since Ata Sisas Hashemayim, you made the heavens, and the word Ata is without a hey, that comes to tell us what? That when Hashem made the heavens, He made the world, He removed the 5 partsufim. Who can tell me what these 5 partsufim were? 5, all 5.
He removed all the shtalshlus,
which are
Chokhmah, Bina, Za, and Malchus.
That's
and
4.
Keter.
Which part of Keser?
The lower one.
So if you return Keser to the Malchus, it's not called making it rich, it's just called giving it tzedakah. Because it already had that and it lost it. And that's the definition of tzedakah, that you're Dai machsura asher yachsar lo. You give it what it was lacking. Whereas Atik, and why is that? Because Arich is the lowest part, is the highest part of the creation. So it's, even though it's Sovev and it's Keser, it's above the creation, it's that aspect of above the creation which is the source of creation. Whereas Atik, they call it the lowest part of the Matzil. It's like the lowest aspect of divinity itself. And that divinity, which is stated completely beyond the world, it's beyond even the source of the world. And therefore, if that would come into Malchus, it would be called Ashirus, wealth. Okay, that's where we left off. So going on into, I think, Vav, right? Yeah.
Nice.
Mamshich ba'maimer. So the Maimer continues. We're talking about a Maimer from the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe's working with. And he said the Rebbe Rashab goes on in the Maimer. The Isa b'Gemara, that it says in the Gemara, Shetzedakah hi la'aniyim ugmus chasadim hi bein la'aniyim bein la'ashirim. That tzedakah is for the poor, and gmus chasadim is both to the poor and to the rich. You can give chesed, gmus chasadim, gomel chesed, to both poor and rich. But tzedakah does not shaykh to the rich. It doesn't fall. The word tzedakah doesn't fall on when you give to the rich.
You know the gematria of tzedakah?
Oh, you love this one. Yes. This is his thing.
What is it?
199. What that teaches this: you can't. Somebody who does tzedakah has got more than 199. Can't ask for it.
Cool.
Umizeh shemigmus chasadim higam la'ashirim. This that we see that you can give chesed even to the wealthy. Move on. It's understood shashpa mitzad chesed hi lamayla medregas ashir. So it's interesting that before we were saying if you give tzedakah, that's like shaykh to the poor, and giving chesed is called wealth. But in reality, since you can give chesed even to the wealthy, right? That means chesed is even higher than wealth.
Oh.
It's the hashpa, that the hashpa shemitzad chesed. What's given over from the standpoint of chesed is lamayla memedregas ashir. It's above the level of ashir, of a wealthy person, and the proof is that even a wealthy person can receive from it. Ulahayir, so you have it's above wealth. Ulahayir, and what is wealth? Wealth is already something we defined as you have all your needs, and even your needs can be like a very, very high level. It's still not called wealth. The minute you have abundance, you're called wealthy. And chesed apparently can even give to the wealthy, which means it's like beyond abundance.
Mm-hmm. What is higher?
To clarify. Dilechora, seemingly, hayevshar lomer, it was possible to say dashpasa chesed la'ashir, that the giving over of chesed to the wealthy, he shemashpim lo ashirus gedol yoser. So one pshat you might think to say is that what does it mean to give something to the wealthy? Is that you're mashpim lo ashirus gedol yoser? Is that you give him even more wealth? In other words, he's rich, he's a millionaire, you make him into a billionaire. More wealth than the status of wealth he had before. Seemingly there are levels of wealth. However, that is one way of looking at it. But that doesn't go well with what the Rebbe Rashab says in his Maimer, which is that he says that the shefa that comes from chesed is above the level of wealth. In other words, no matter how wealthy the person gets, it's still called wealth. You can go from X to I don't know, A to Z in levels of wealth, but all of it is still called wealth. And if you're going to be able to give chesed to the wealthy, it means that this thing of chesed is beyond all measures of wealth.
I guess that lack, it means that he needed something that the wealth couldn't fulfill. If he had a lack that chesed needed to give to him.
Right, exactly. Even, in other words, he didn't have a lack from the standpoint that he was missing something. He already had, he's not even relevant for tzedakah, right? He was getting chesed, he was already rich. But you're right, even in his abundance, there was some type of a lack, which he was still in the category of receiving something.
Yeah.
Yesh lomar, so we could say, k'shashpa shemashpiyim lo. You have a copy of this thing? An extra one? Have an extra copy? Oh, sorry about that. I'll have to get you one. Shashpa shemashpiyim lo. This shefa that you give over to him, achshav hu inyan sheba'erko. So basically, when you give him over some hashpa that you give him now, it's an inyan sheba'erko. Is like his erech is like something that's relative to his level. Kevan shemekodem hayachasara inyan shemashpiyim lo. Since previously he was lacking that thing that you're giving him now, avsha inyan hu be'erko, even though the thing that you're giving to him is approximately on his level, eino amisis ha'inyan da'ashir. So this is exactly what you were just saying, Barak.
Yeah.
Basically, since you're giving him something that he can still receive from, that it shows that he wasn't the true level of wealth. If when you give him something, it can make him wealthier. Let's read that line again because we got sort of stuck in the middle. This that he says, go back to the period before. This that he says that in the mimer, that the hashpa that you give him from the standpoint of chesed is above the level of ashir, of wealth. So we want to say about that when the hashpa that you give over to him, achshav, hu inyan sheba arko, it's something which is relative to his level. Since right before you gave it to him, he was lacking that thing. Even though it's something which is parallel, sort of relative to his level, that shows that he wasn't truly holding by the level of wealth. That's exactly what Baruch just said. The very fact that you can give him something that he was lacking a moment ago means whatever he had was not the true concept of wealth, because true wealth, you're not lacking anything. Therefore, he explains to the mimer, the gemuz chasadim la'ashirim, he shashefa shemitzad hachesed. Basically, if you're giving the wealthy person and he can receive it, that means a second ago he was lacking something that you're now giving him. Yeah? A second ago he was lacking what you gave him now. You gave him something. So he was lacking the thing you gave him. Which just shows that he had a lack. So even though he wasn't poor, but whatever level he was on, it was not the true meaning of the word rich. If he now is in a state of less lacking than he was the second after you gave him something.
Right.
Okay? What's that?
Think so.
You think so?
That he was lacking, now
he was lacking something, and now he got something. So even though what he was lacking was not necessarily putting him in the category of being poor, when he was in a lacking state, he wasn't poor. He was already rich.
He wasn't filled to the brim. He wasn't 100%.
Right.
There's still more something you could pour into him. He had a space for something.
But that filled his lack.
Yeah.
That's it?
Let's say it did. So in other words, he was a level of rich, but it wasn't the total level of rich. So therefore, he was relevant to give him something. If someone's fully rich, I guess the idea is not even in the realm of receiving anything. Yeah. What can you give him? He has everything.
Talking bird.
But
That was a good one.
That was nice.
That's a good one. I think that's the exact definition of what can you give someone who has everything.
Right.
Only a talking bird.
Yeah. Sounds like a song.
Anyway, v'lechein
This is the Mashiach name.
v'lechein mivar ba'maimer. Therefore, actually, it is true, because what are we saying? What is this level that we're talking about? It's basically this idea of atik, right? And that's what the idea of Yitzchak is. Yitzchak is like this supernal, futuristic laughter of the pleasure of HaShem. That is the level of a talking bird. So that's what you're going to give this rich guy. Anyway, let's get out of the bird for a second. So lechein mivar ba'maimer. Therefore, he explains in the Maimer, the gimlus chasadim la'ashirim, that when you're going to give chesed to the rich, he sha'ashefa shemitzad chesed. It's that the shefa that comes from the standpoint of his chesed is l'may l'madrigas ashir. It's really totally above the level of rich. Hainu, which means what? Shu besug acher lagamri. It's a completely different category of status.
Besug is category.
Sug is category. V'zeh she'ein lo inyan she'ein lo ba'archo klal, eino chesaron ba'ashira shelo. So, in other words, how do you get out of this conundrum that no matter what, if you're going to give somebody something and they receive it and it improves them, that it shows that they were not at the pure level of rich before that. In other words, if they could be improved by something, it means that their wealth was not whole. So, in other words, that means, but we're talking about giving something to the rich. We're talking about giving something to someone whose wealth is whole. So, how do you get out of this problem? How can you ever give something to the rich? Basically, is the question. If you're going to give something to the rich and it makes him richer, it means the second before he was lacking that extra richness, right? In which case he wasn't really rich, right? He wasn't in the full state of richness.
He wasn't aware of his lack.
So how do you get out of this, basically? So he's saying that no, what's going on here is the guy is as rich can be. He is holding by the level of ashirus that really you can't give him any more richness that he has. It's like it says in the days of Shlomo, silver was worth nothing because you can't give him anymore. He had everything. But when we're talking about giving to the rich, then it's not a type of giving to the rich which is just improving in a relative comparable level, making him little rich to very rich, because then he wasn't really. It's not called really giving to the rich to begin with, because if he was lacking something, he wasn't truly rich. That's what we're dealing with. It's like, what does it mean to be truly rich? If the rich person can receive something and get richer, then he wasn't really rich in the first place. He wasn't holding by the state of truly rich. So that if you're actually going to give to the truly rich, that means not lacking and you cannot improve on his richness. That means that you're going to give something to him, which is what chesed does. The line in the Gemara is, Gemlus chasidim, you can give to the poor and to the rich. Which means the rich in its fullness can actually receive something. How does that work? So it must be saying that you're giving him a sug acher. You're giving him like some kind of new level of giving, which is such that if you look in this parentheses, he brings out the finer language, that is something completely beyond his level, which when you give it to him, eino chesaron ba'ashiru shelo. It's not that there's any lacking in the richness that he already had. It's just that you're giving him something on a completely different dimension, which even though he was, so to speak, didn't have it before, it didn't put any lack onto the status of his wealth that he had before that. You understand? Because what you're giving him is like beyond the kalim altogether. Like he wouldn't even imagine that he needed such a thing. Right. That you're going to give him such a new brand of wealth.
Right.
So that it doesn't contradict. That even though he gets it, it didn't mean that his previous status was not fully rich. You understand what I'm trying to get at here?
He was unaware of his lack.
Right. And not only was he unaware of his lack, he truly lacked nothing. He was rich. In other words, to give to the rich means the person is rich. He has abundance, and it's a type of abundance which is not relative to having more abundance. In other words, he really is rich. He has the full level of abundance. And nevertheless, if he's able to receive something, so that means he's not lacking anything. You're giving him like a new brand of something that he Pasha doesn't even need at all.
Wow, where are you going with this?
Well,
Right, but you understand?
yeah.
Okay. Yosef, you're in there?
Yeah.
It's like going.
Get over here, there's space for over here.
He became
Come on.
What's that?
a new Kali to
work.
receive more.
Perhaps.
It's like going back in time and giving like King Solomon my cell phone.
Uh-huh. There you go.
He'll be like,
There's no satellites.
But just whatever, you'll use...
Right. No, it's true. Just like a different level of perception of what could even be given. Zion. Okay, so now we're really going to spend a lot of time trying to understand what that is. How can you give something to the wealth if the wealth is defined by perfect abundance that is not even relatively amplifiable? So what are you going to give to him? What's higher than that? So to understand this level of chesed, which is able to give and be mashpia even to the wealth. So makdim ba'maimer, we're chazering over the Rebbe's Maimer, the Rebbe Rashav's Maimer. He prefaces in his Maimer, Bir inyan hashiru shahaya b'yimei Shlomo. There you go. He starts off with the wealth that was found in the days of Shlomo. Darga hachi nailis bashirus. That is the definition of the highest level of wealth.
Shlomo Hamelech.
Shlomo Hamelech's time, there was never a period in history that there was any greater wealth that could possibly be had. In other words, like we were saying before, there's a measure of wealth. You could have $1 million, you could have $1 billion, you could have $1 trillion. There's some peak of wealth where it's just silly already. You can't give him anymore, right? You can't get any more. You're at the peak of wealth. There's a sort of like top echelon of what it means to be the ultimate wealth of not only of your generation but of all time on earth. Okay, and that was Shlomo Hamelech.
I don't have wealth. I am wealth.
Where did all that money go?
Money.
Yeah. A lot of it went to the Vatican. When they came, they emptied out the wealth. They took it, scattered it here, there.
The Spanish people is goyim.
Anyway, Umavar, he explains, Tezeh Shebiyimei Shlomo. He goes now sort of spiritual there, that in the days of Shlomo, have kaima sihara bashlemusa. The moon, kaima stood, sihara the moon, bashlemusa in its fullness. What does that mean?
The moon stood up in his greatness.
The moon was full in the
And
days of
people
Shlomo.
were like full.
Why do we say that? Because I believe from Abraham until Shlomo Hamelech was 15 generations.
Oh wow, we said that before.
So that means, in other words, the Jewish people were like on the rise until they got to, that's why that's the pinnacle of wealth, because he represented not only physically, but spiritually. The moon, which is basically the receptor, as we were talking about at lunch yesterday, the receptor of the divinity being able to flow into this world. The moon is like the reflection of the sun. The sun represents, let's say, Havaya. The moon is the ability for the Yud Kei Vav Kei Havaya to reflect into the creation. And when that happens, not only spiritually we're on the top of the game, we had the Beis HaMikdash, and not only the Beis HaMikdash, but the first Beis HaMikdash, where all the miracles, but not only do we have the spiritual full moon of the full gamut of godly revelation, it trickled down even to physically, the world never had it so good, ever, and in terms of its just abundance. And that's what's the tachlis and pinnacle of wealth.
So the movie Bina?
The moon is Malchus, usually.
Which word is moon?
Sihara.
Oh, that's moon.
Yeah. So this that we say that in Shlomo's time the moon was full. Who the knows of Malchus Lavana Sihara. He says in addition to the fact that it was drawn into Malchus, i.e. the moon, i.e. the Sihara. Hey partsufim shenechsru. So despite the fact, what does it mean? It means that Shlomo figured out a way to not only not be poor anymore, which is to draw back all the 5 partsufim that were taken out of the world when it had to be created, which basically when HaShem created the world, he removed a certain measure of godliness. Shlomo brought them all back. And therefore there was just like a silly, ridiculous level of abundance because the world was in its fullness again, like it was like in its source before HaShem had to make the tzimtzum. He put all the godliness back into the world. So in addition to the fact that he was drawn into Malchus, which represented here by the moon, right, that basically cylinder, that channel through which godliness can come into the world is the moon. So when the moon is not full, it means not all of godliness is able to get in. When the moon is full, 15 generations later, the pinnacle. So he not only did he replace the 5 partsufim that they had access to, Malchus, Zah, Bina, Chochma, and even Keser. In addition, Nimshach Bagam Hagilu de Penimius HaKeser. He mamish had it. He had it all. He drew down Ashirus, wealth, which means something which is beyond the lack of the world, which we said a moment ago, which was the inner side of Keser. Atik, Shlomo Hamelech had it. He was rich, which means he drew something into the world which was not relevant to the lack of the world. It was a full abundance, something the world didn't need in order to be completely whole. Umashirus de Malchus, and from the wealth that was distributed into Malchus, which is basically means Atik is now flowing into Malchus. Malchus also represents Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish people. It's also called Malchus. It's called the moon. It's called Knesset Yisrael because we're like the moon in that we are sort of the gateway through which godliness can shine into this world. So that not only was, like, so to speak, the moon full, the Jewish people, and it was, Sfira of Malchus was full because the Jewish people reached their state of fullness. We became like a perfect kli, not only to bring into the world what was lacking, but even wealth. And therefore, from the Ashirus of Malchus, because Malchus was full, Knesset Yisrael, our source, Nimshacha Ashirus Muflaga Li Yisrael Gam Lamate. It was drawn down a sort of awesome wealth. Muflaga is like awesome. Li Yisrael, to the Jewish people, Gam Lamata, also down below. Because the spiritual moon was full, the Jewish people were full.
How is it that? I don't know why I thought that Hashem, when He made the Tzimtzum, He just made it to create the world and then He put everything back in place. The 5 partsufim. Like there were like 5 partsufim that were there as the ones that there are now. They were there before the Tzimtzum to like. They were different.
They were there when the world was, like, so to speak, in its source, before it existed as a separate entity. It was inside of Hashem, so it was filled with all these levels. So when he wanted to have a separate, it's like much like what we spoke about in the Mimer last 2 days. We were learning about the stones. If you have too much light, the vessels are in there, but they're nullified.
Right.
It's like we talked about, like if you want to make like river beds, but there's a tsunami. Even you're not gonna be able to make out the individuation of all these riverbeds because the water is just gonna like basically flood them. And even if they're there, even if you're in the middle of like an ocean, you have an ocean floor and it has all kinds of ridges and mountains and valleys and so forth. It has but you can't see any of it because it's flooded with godly light. That's what was going on with the world before Hashem made the Tzimtzum. All the individual parts were there, but it was like flooded inside of Elokus. So in order to get the contours of the world to be able to be seen independently, that they would come out and show themselves, he had to remove all the light in order to get like the riverbed without any water, so you could see the definition of the world. Then the job of the creation was to start bringing it back in. So really Hashem brought it back in right off the bat in Gan Eden. We had he brought in a ton of godliness reintroduced a ton of godliness into the world. But then with the sin, it was all removed. And it was not just one sin, it was 7 consecutive generations of sin, as the Rabbi quotes the Midrash Basi Lagani, that from Adam and Cain and Enosh, and there were 7 generations all the way down till basically the flood, right? And even after, the Aflaga, the Dura Aflaga, after the flood even, then all the godliness basically went up again and the world became impoverished. Wow. Then the 7 generations of tzaddikim from Avram to Moshe started to bring it down again, and they were pretty much rich, or at least not poor in the days of Moshe for sure. And then 7 generations later, in other words, you had David Hamelech. David is Gematria 14, that's 14 generations after Abraham. And then when you hit the full moon, they tapped into the Panemius of Keser. It's like they had like unbridled wealth.
Wow.
So it was a process of feeling the moon, bringing back the godliness, which was first shaykh to the world, and then even finally that wasn't even shaykh to the world.
What are we holding right now?
Right now we're holding by David Hamelech. We're holding by
Shiach.
Dur Hashvi.
I'll take that.
Akshav.
Wow. Yeah, we're holding in a good time here. Anyway, it's they say that you mentioned. I don't know who mentioned it, but you mentioned it. Give Shlomo Hamelech a cell phone.
Yeah.
There's actually it says in the I don't know the Gemara. I think Sanhedrin. I don't remember, but it says that
Moshe comes into the base.
What's that?
Into the base midrash. Where what's going on?
Sorry.
Where Moshe came into the base midrash and listened to them arguing. He didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, but I was going to say it's he used to fly around on a wheel, like a horseless chariot, basically. Shlomo Hamelech. Which means they had a certain like wealth of the natural world as well. They were able to tap into its like powers, like what we call science. They were like, he was like floating, and they were like moving fast on the like without wheels. You know, so they had that going on.
Yeah,
so you can see already from the what's happening from the earth, giving us like its gems that we're holding by like a certain level of ashiras, things that are happening on the earth that seem like they're very, very, very deep inside, like coming out. So you can see that we're heading towards a Shlomo era over here and beyond. And why? Because of this mimer, because of Hasidus. Anyway, weiter. We'll see, all the secrets will become clear. So he's saying that there they hit the level of Ashirus, and therefore there was Ashirus Muflaga L'Yisrael Gam Lamata, Ashirus Muflaga Bagashmias, wealth, in other words, unbridled wealth physically, Va'ad She'ein Kesef Nechshav Yimei Shlomo L'Me'uma, to the point, as I said a moment ago, that silver was in the days of Ein Kesef Nechshav, silver was not considered worth anything, B'Yimei Shlomo, in the days of Shlomo L'Me'uma, anything. In other words, mamish, like, you know, huge pounds of silver and everything. It's like throw it away in the trash. It was nothing. It wasn't worth anything. That's the level of wealth that was going there. Vashirus muflaga beruchnius, and of course they had this unbridled spiritual wealth. Shia b'yamei Shlomo dafka nivna beis hamikdash. That's when they built the beis hamikdash. The agilu shehab a beis hamikdash, and the revelation they had in the temple. Hu giloi naili yoser. And you see that it was the revelation of God they had in the temple was higher than the revelation in the Mishkan that they had all up until that time. So you see that even though Moshe obviously brought the Shekhinah back down and sort of replenished the lack of the world, it was nothing compared to what the Mikdash was. It was like the final resting place of the Mishkan. They traveled with him all through the desert, all through Eretz Yisrael, until they finally made a temple for God. The revelation of there was much, much greater, unparalleled greater than was in the Mishkan.
Because of the Ashirus.
Yeah, because they struck gold in the Panemius Atik there. Or they got to Atik, Panemius Kesser.
That's why he could fly.
And that's why he could fly. All kinds of things were going on. Well, Lahosif, to add, Dezesh b'yimei Shlomo. This that in the days of Shlomo was such a high revelation. In fact, it was even before they built the temple. And it was their 15th generation. They had hit the full moon.
You said even before the Mikdash was built, it was higher than.
Yeah, as long as Shlomo's generation, they basically came in with it. This that the temple was built through Shlomo specifically. Even though the plans of the temple were already prepared by David, Hashem didn't let him build it because he had blood on his hands, basically. But he did prepare the material, or he prepared the plans. So this that Shlomo built at Dafka, who Kamosha Kasuv, that's because it says Shlomo Yeh Ish Menucha. Right? It was about Shlomo. It wasn't so much about the temple. It was about him. He was the presentation of this level of Ashirus. Like, even before he built the Mikdash, he already had that level in himself. As it says, Shlomo was an Ish Menucha. He was a man of tranquility. V'shalom v'sheket aten al Yisrael b'yamav. Peace and tranquility, or quiet, peace and quiet, I will give, God says, to the Jewish people in his days, because he's a man of Menucha, of tranquility. V'lechein hu yivne bayis lishmi. Therefore he will build the house in my name. In other words, the house was just an expression of him. So even before he built it, the generation was already there. And it's known that the fact that all the nations were nullified to Shlomo. That's why there were, in fact, in his days, peace, 40 years of peace. 40. There was 40 years of peace in his days. It was the only time there was ever peace on earth.
40 years.
That's a lot. You're saying like.
I'm saying that in the entire history of creation, there was only 40 years that there was no war on the earth.
The whole world.
The whole world was at peace. It was like a messianic age. Atik was shining into the world, something which is not even relevant to the lack of the world. It was mamish, the base of Mikdash was standing in Jerusalem. There was miracles, constant miracles happening every day, and all the world was like in awe of the Jewish king who had created peace on earth for 40 years.
The word is the
Okay.
Vuhu. So the fact that all the nations were nullified to Shlomo, and therefore there was peace in his days. Who shayu betelim lagiluim? Who were they nullified to? They were nullified to the Orein Sof, sheheir al yado, that shined out through Shlomo. In other words, it's really all about the tzaddik yisod olam. Whatever level the tzaddik can sort of rise to, that's the ability of that level of godliness to come into the world. The Rebbe even says regarding the Beis HaMikdash that the whole reason that the Beis HaMikdash, this is like a side point, but it's very interesting connected to this. In other words, what we're really saying is that Shlomo was the Beis HaMikdash, right? Yeah. Because he's the tzaddik through which that level of godliness could come into the world. I mean, who was able to get it's not just because 15 generations went by like a clock. Each one had their tzaddik, and each tzaddik did his avoda. It's not like it just happens automatically. This is like the most strenuous work. In other words, Yitzchak didn't just pop out that there's going to be another generation of godliness after Avram. He had to be a Yitzchak. That's what we say, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Ve'elokei Yaakov. Why don't we just say Ve'elokei Avram, Yitzchak, Ve'Yaakov? So it's because each one, it was their God. In other words, each one of them was worthy of having the revelation from their own efforts. How much more so when you compound the efforts in the generations that came before. So it was like a double thing. So Shlomo was the conduit to this level of godliness in the world. Therefore, before the Mikdash, after the Mikdash, it didn't really matter. It was really that through him shined the Orein Sof. And so the Rebbe says in the temple, Bichlal, when the Rebbe talks about, basically, it's a little bit shocking, but the Rebbe said it, and he said it loud and clear. He said that in 770 is called the Mikdash Ma'at. It's basically the place where the temple resides in the time of Gullus. Mamish, like that. He says that it's Bedugmas Bais Beis HaMikdash Haya b'Yerushalayim. And he says in every generation there is such a place. As soon as the temple was destroyed, the Shechina, which was in the temple, went into what's called Beis Rabbeinu Shebabavel. It went into the house of whoever was the Rebbe at the time, and it has been moving around the world, kind of like the Mishkan, since then. And what's the idea? Is that really, it doesn't have to do with a physical place or a house so much. It has to do with the fact that what happened in that house was that the Sanhedrin was sat in there. And the top of the Sanhedrin, the Av Beis Din, plays that role. Either the king or the head of the Beis Din plays that role of the 71st member. And the 71st member was like Moshe compared to the 70 elders. In other words, how do we get the 71 members of the Sanhedrin? Because Moshe was at one point asked by HaShem, gather 70 elders around yourself, and you guys will sort of judge the people. So from that point on, in the days of Moshe, there was a 71-member court. And the one who is above the 70 is in place of Moshe Rabbeinu. So since in the temple, that person was there, that's why there was revelation of God in the temple. That's in other words, it was about what went on in the temple, not the place or the bricks and stones. Wow. So when that place was destroyed, that person didn't disappear, he moved. And the whole Shekhinah moved with him. And so it's been like moving around the entire world, much like HaShem wanted to move the Shekhinah around the world in the Midbar, uprooting it from place to place. There's a sort of need for that, because we had to go and sort of annihilate the klippas and bring like life to an uninhabited land. That's what the Jewish people have been doing in exile. We've been moving the Mikdash around the entire world in the form of the Rebbe of that generation, the king of that generation, whoever he would be who filled that role. Until ultimately, just like in those days, it will finally go back to its place, and it will be there for sure, the highest level of revelation. But why? Not because it's got back to a place, it's not geographical. It's basically because the person who will bring it back to that place will be like Shlomo, that from him will come out mamash the unbridled Orein Sof that no one's ever seen before. So the Rebbe did say that 770 is the final resting place of the Shekhinah in Gullus. That from 770 it's going to go to the Beis HaMikdash, no more stops. Huh? Shekhinah, according to the Rebbe, is in 770. The Shekhinah mamash.
It makes sense too that like
that's not like fudge thing. I mean, the Rebbe says it mamish in clear osios, like paragraph after paragraph, explaining how it's definitely shocking, and it's definitely, don't take my word for it, please, but you should read it into it.
It makes sense too that people are much more valuable than stones and wood.
Right. In other words, it's the tzaddik. He's a conduit of Elokus, so where he is the revelation. So anyway, yeah, what are we saying? We're saying a lot of crazy stuff out there, but we're saying that the nations were nullified to God in that generation, not because the Beis Hamikdash, because the Or Ein Sof that was flowing out of Shlomo Hamelech himself. We are where? I lost my place. Okay, right. I'm with you. Ready?
Yeah.
Period. 5 lines down the center of the page. V'al derech zeh, hu menogei lezeh, it's regarding this fact, sheba'u elav mikol ha'amim lishmo es chachmaso, that they came to him, they came to him mikol ha'amim, from all the nations, lishmo es chachmaso, to hear his wisdom. Everybody came to hear Shlomo. In other words, he was like giving them advice on how to run their countries, mamish. That the real reason for this, sheba'u elav, that they came to him, hu mipnei shenimshechu le'elokus, is because they were drawn to godliness. They were drawn to his wisdom. He wasn't just like a wise man who learned a lot. He was a divine being, and they were drawn to divinity. It's like people were drawn to the Beis Hamikdash. Like, you wouldn't want to go check that out. I mean, people are saying there's like miracles coming out of there. You're just like a boat ride away. They wanted to see what was going on with this thing. It was like something beyond creation, sitting there in a throne. So they weren't just drawn to his wisdom, they were drawn to divinity.
Mashiach.
Yeah. And this is like what it says by Mashiach, V'naru elav kol hagoyim. It says they will flow to him like a river. All the nations, they'll line up to talk to him. Line up around the block, waiting just to like look at him and take $1 from his hand. And this, that all of them will be drawn to him. Why are they drawn to him? He's got a beautiful face? Yeah, but it's because they're drawn to Elukus. They want to see divinity. They heard there's such a thing. And it's like sitting somewhere in a little shul in Crown Heights. They want to see it. What is this? Because the revelation of light that's shown at that time, Mashach es anitzuzos, and what's happening sort of spiritually in a Kabbalistic terminology, that the revelation was so strong that it drew to it, Mashach it drew to itself the nitzotzos, the sparks sheba'amim that are in the nations. And what are the nations? They're also elokus. It's just they're elokus wrapped in a klippa. So the idea is that when you bring a torch next to a small flame, the flame will pop off the wick, as we talk about, and jump into the bigger flame. It's like the nature of one level, of a smaller level of light, to attach itself and be drawn to a bigger level of light. That's even how physics works. So it is how godliness works. Lahavdil is that they were all drawn to him because he created such a huge torch of light that it's like they were popping off their wicks left, right, and center from all the nations, because he drew the godliness out of them. This is exactly, by the way, what Yitzchak wanted to do to Esav. Right? Oh, how could Yitzchak give a bracha to Esav? What was he thinking? So he was such a huge light that he thought he would pull the godliness out. There was godliness trapped inside of Esav, a high level of godliness trapped inside. He wanted to pull it out. Instead of going out to them, going out to Esav, refining him and trying to make him do tshuva and work with him sort of on his level, he'll just like basically build a big giant Beis Hamikdash, and everyone on their own volition will it will draw them to the holiness, and they'll automatically become refined because they have godliness in them. It's just trapped. So there's 2 ways to get it out. You can go like mining away at it and try and find it, or you could just make like a huge torch that it will be sucked up into you.
Wow.
And that's exactly what Shlomo was doing. So they were flowing into him like a river, just all the godly sparks. And also money. They paid him wealth, tribute. Everyone was paying him their literally gold and silver and their souls they were giving him. Yeah.
Shlomo Hamelech was the highest part of the whole world from the beginning of the creation.
Even beyond, it says. He reached a level that was never reached before. He reached Atik, which is beyond the creation.
And still they weren't able to bring Mashiach. Then why do we think in our generation, where we don't have that, we're not considered the time of Shlomo, so we could bring it?
Okay, so that's the big question is that, Ikshadara how is the generation worthy if every generation succeedingly gets lower and lower and lower. The whole question, Bechlal, is how, in a million years, could any generation bring Mashiach as its continuous departure from the Ma'amad of Har Sinai or from the base of Mikdash gets worse and worse and worse every second.
Like every generation thinks they could bring the Mashiach.
But every generation is less worthy,
And
right?
still they think they could bring it and they
So
can't.
the idea, right? So the Rebbe says, like, basically what we call Hiya no Senis. In other words, that's the whole point. In other words, when is Mashiach going to come? When Hashem wants a dir b'tachtonim, He wants a dwelling place in the lowest world. So until the world reached basically its lowest peak, then it's not even shaykh for Mashiach to come, A. And B, as the Rebbe always uses the line, like it's a little person on top of a giant.
You're saying it's going to get worse.
Which means that even though relatively your avodah is lefi erech relatively very, very insignificant compared to even one generation that came before you, let alone 20 generations that came before us, but their avodah did not go away. It's a collective process of refining. So the fact is that's why he says our job is just to polish the buttons. How about sewing the suit, sizing it up on the person, like dyeing the wool, these like difficult things of making the suit whole, that we didn't even have to take care of because we're not even on a level to even pretend to take care of it. We don't know how to do that. We don't even know how to tie the knots of our tefillin, gentlemen. That's embarrassing. I don't think there's one person in this room that can do that. Are we even Jewish? I mean, how do you put on tefillin? You can't tie them, you know? And the thing is that we're not everyone could tie tefillin like 400 years ago. Every single person in the room. Because Rambam says, any Jews, like words of weight, you know, it's kedai for every single person to know how to tie this knot. How are you going to put on tefillin? And I'm just bringing out a point that we mamas don't know anything. We don't feel anything. We don't know anything. So we weren't asked to make the suit. Generations that were greater than us did that. We were asked to polish the buttons. A simple job, but if you don't have a polished buttons, then no one's gonna take you seriously. So we have our little job to do. And the point is that has to, until you do the last act on the suit, also Mashiach cannot come.
It's the last act.
Because there's people who are tzaddikim who have spiritual vision who told us that we're at the end, and even that, no, more than that, even we've already finished. And like
it's also gave us a timeline of 6,000 years, let's say. How do we know if by us finishing up polishing will bring it closer, or do we just... Only
because there's people that can see these things that are actually have spiritual vision. And they're prophets, and they tell us, and we believe them. That's it. That's part of our religion. Don't look into it too deeply. If you don't believe your prophets, we got bigger problems than that. Right? What are you going to do? You're right. Nobody knows. No, we're blind. The Chacham are called Einei Ha'edah. They're called the eyes of the generation, of the congregation. They're the eyes of the congregation. We follow there. We're just like going along. We can't see anything. But they see. If you don't believe, it's problematic. Then the mamash, you're in trouble.
Chacham that said it's going to take 6,000 years. That's the deadline.
No, but so if you have a Chacham who said who knows when, and you have your generation's Chacham who's telling you, he also learned what they said.
That's what I'm saying.
So he also learned what they said. That's the point. Anytime you're going to try to get a person to say, yeah, the Rebbe said that, but Chachamim before him said this, he also learned what those Chachamim said. If he's going to go ahead and say something, it's not because he's ignorant of what was said before him, it's because he's explaining what was said before him. So basically, we're ignorant of what was said before. He knows. So we have to believe somebody. You have to have some rabbi that actually knows, right?
I don't understand what he says.
Well, that's true. You don't want to read into it. It better be darn clear. So the fact that, let's say the Rebbe said it, like, let's say 600, 1,000 times in all different types of ways and manners, tried to clarify it pretty good. We're in the final generation. Yeah.
Just because our generation is going down, I don't know if it necessarily means that the Siddiqim that are coming in the world are coming down.
On the contrary, they're going up.
Right.
In order to raise up such a low level, they have to be a little bit higher than the one before them.
So what we're saying now is that everything was on the merit of King Solomon.
Right.
So it's all a matter of the Siddiqim.
Yeah, but he was able to bring his generation to a certain level. Just like we said by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And I was speaking about it by the Bima, this exact thing about like minhagim. Mm-hmm. You have a minhag of not sleeping in the sukkah. Now, only tzaddikim have such a minhag. Right. But the fact that you now have that minhag, it's like it was given to you an ability to do something way, 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 way beyond your level. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu did when he gave us mitzvahs. A simple person could put on tefillin and suddenly like do something that Mamash Avram Avinu couldn't do. Mm-hmm. So it's because of the unbelievable holiness of the tzaddik, he's able to deliver into the hands of the simple people the greatest weaponry. In In other words, you're just a simple person, but someone's going to like say, come over here, soldier, boot up, here's an atomic bomb, here's a jet that flies beyond the speed of light, and go put it somewhere. Like, okay, like you have tools in your hands that you didn't make, but some great person put them in your hands. And that's also a chiddush. The fact that you can have great things doesn't mean that you can put them in the hands of a simple person. That's already a second level of unbelievable talent, right? That you could know all these things and have me have them at the same time. That's what a Rabbi does. He brings his whole generation up. Like we said before about how stones of a house are elevated because of a person lives in them. They don't stop being stones, but suddenly they're like housing the Shekhinah. Because a person who built them has some kind of a chachma to enable these lowly things to bear him. That's what it says. The people are the foot of the Moshe Rabbeinu. We're like his feet, but the feet are connected with him. All right, they're dropping like flies over here, guys.
And also we're saying that it's a cumulative.
Yosef, don't leave us.
We're also saying that it's a cumulative effort.
Yes, which means that we didn't lose anything.
Basically, like the previous generations were at a high level, and also that all of their avoda, all of their bigurim, like
Stayed
has,
good. Yeah. You know, we're working on top of that level. It didn't go away. All right.
Can you help me here with the words a little bit?
Yeah.
שבעמים בדוגמת אבוקה.
We didn't do that yet. We didn't get that yet. Bedugmas avuka, which is a torch. But this is by way of an example of a torch. Shemosheches eleha, that draws to it kol hanitzotzos, all sparks, like we just said. So Shlomo put this torch there and sucked all the godliness to him. That's why they came to him and they gave him gold. They wanted to hear his wisdom. He was drawing their inner sparks out of their exile and freeing them in his high level. Go ahead.
This thing, there's a connection between this and making bonfires and like that.
Yeah, maybe. I would say so. V'kevan shagili sheheir az, since the revelation that's shown then, Hayagiloi Naila b'Yosef, was an unbelievably high revelation. L'chein, gam hanitzotzus shemakomos harachokim. Therefore, even the sparks in very distant places, in other words, islands, out in the middle of nowhere, nimshechu la'agiloi. They were all drawn to this revelation. You make a little bonfire, it's going to draw the locals. You make a bonfire that mamash is the size of a city, so it's going to draw everybody. So because he made such a gigantic light, it drew out sparks from all corners of the earth, very, very far away from him. He was able to access tiny little pushed off regions of creation and elevate them because of how much light that he shined in his own place.
Wow.
Kamosha Kasuv, Malkas Sheba, like Queen Sheba, Shamat et Shama Shlomo l'shem Havaya. It says Queen Sheba heard the reputation of Shlomo l'shem Havaya, for the shame of God. In other words, for the name of God. V'tavo Yerushalayma. And she came to Jerusalem. She heard God was there, and she came all the way from her home and her kingdom and came to Jerusalem. And there, children, story ends for this morning. Sheba.
Yeah.
Getting into Sheba now.
It's good.
It's good. You're good. Yeah, she was Ethiopia.
Ethiopia?
I think so.
I remember doing this
It's a very important mimer.
Picture holding like
You've done this mimer with me also before, you remember it? You got to do it a few times, let it sink in. It's really mamash a classic.
What? This one?
Mm-hmm.
But you see a lot of times that the blacks in Toronto when they have the
You remember where it's going, the mimer?
yeah, that she doesn't change when when she came, something like that. Like the people that come to Solomon, like they're coming their own
Right.
their own avoda, they're coming, but
Right,
like
but she changed, but others, they didn't come.
oh, that's what it was.
Right.
Some people didn't come.
Right.
Or then like it does like scorpions in the midbar or something.
Yeah, we're going to get into the whole thing. Nice, all right, good. Review is good. So you can give it over.
Yeah.
Don't forget your thingy here.
Yep.